Mr. President, whether one is a progressive or a Democrat or a conservative or a Republican or somewhere in between, there is a deep understanding in this country that we are living in a rigged economy, and people are increasingly angry and frustrated about the growing inequality and unfairness that they see all about them. It is hard to believe, but in the United States of America today, the top 0.1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. 0.1%, bottom 90%. Study just came out fairly recently indicating that in the United States of America today, the three wealthiest people in our country, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, now own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. Three people own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. Meanwhile, while the very, very rich get richer, some 40 million Americans are living in poverty. These are people who are struggling today to figure out how they put food on the table for their kids, how they put gas in the car in order to go to work, how they pay their electric bills, how they deal with child care. 40 million people living in poverty. Middle class is disappearing. People working 2 or 3 jobs. Young people, for the first time in the modern history of this country, may well have a standard of living lower than their parents. And on top of all of that, we remain the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all of our people. 28 million today have no health insurance. Many more are underinsured, and if our Republican colleagues get their way, they're going to throw another 20 or 30 million people off of the health insurance that they have. But it is not only the reality of grotesque levels of inequality that are making the American people despondent and angry. It is the reality that the people on top, with their wealth and with their power, can access lawyers and accountants who are able to manipulate the system to benefit themselves at the expense of everyone else. And that is the essence of what a rigged economy is about and what I want to say a few words about today. In my view, one of the great crises facing our world, and we are in a world of many crises, is the rapid movement toward international oligarchy, in which a handful of billionaires own and control not just a significant part of the American economy, but a significant part of the world economy. This is, needless to say, an issue that does not get a whole lot of discussion because, in general, the more important the issues are, the less discussion they get within the corporate media or within the political world that we live in here in the Congress. But let me reiterate that one of the great crises that we face is that a handful of billionaires are moving this entire planet toward an oligarchic society in which the people on top not only have incredible wealth, but incredible political power as well. On Sunday, just this last Sunday, a group of investigative journalists released over 13 million files known as the Paradise Papers, exposing just how horrific this situation has become. These papers show how a handful of oligarchs in the United States and throughout the world get richer by hiding their wealth and their profits offshore to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. The list of individuals implicated in the Paradise Papers include billionaires like the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, Carl Icahn, and Robert Mercer. It includes large financial institutions such as Wells Fargo, Citigroup, and Bank of America. It includes large multinational corporations like Apple, Nike, and ExxonMobil. And it includes members of the Trump administration, like Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn, and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. Let's be clear. Offshore tax evasion is a major problem not just for the United States, but for governments throughout the world. And this is really quite unbelievable, but in the year 2012, the Tax Justice Network estimated that at least $21 trillion, $21 trillion, a number almost beyond comprehension, is being stashed in offshore tax havens around the world. Imagine that. $21 trillion flowing into tax havens in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Luxembourg, all these places around the world where the billionaire class and large corporations are stashing their money, not only to avoid taxes in the United States, to avoid taxes in Great Britain, avoid taxes in France, Germany, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you know, it's a funny thing about these guys. All of these billionaires, they love veterans, and they love the military, and they want to see us rebuild the infrastructure, and they want to see our kids get a good education. But you know what? They don't want to pay taxes to make that happen. They want ordinary people to pay the taxes. So Republicans here want to increase military spending by $50, $60 billion. Not the billionaires who are going to pay the taxes on that. They got their money in the Cayman Islands. It's the working class, the middle class, upper middle class who will pay, not the billionaires. They love America, except when it comes to accepting their fair share to make sure that we continue to provide the services that our men, women, and children need. Now, the situation has become so absurd, and this is really how crazy it is, that one 5-story office building in the Cayman Islands is now the home of nearly 20,000 corporations. Now, as best I understand, this particular building in the Cayman Islands, it's called the Ugland House, is 5 stories. Now, I know that you could squeeze people into a building, sometimes 3 or 4 people live in a room, but I think it's a little bit hard to understand how 20,000 corporations function in a 5-story building. And of course, the answer is 20,000 corporations do not function in this 5-story building. It's all a fraud. It's simply a mailbox address for 20,000 corporations who are in this building in order to avoid paying their taxes. They're stashing their profits and their wealth in corporations that use this building as a mailing address. Mr. President, in the United States alone, and I know we're busy talking about so-called tax reform here, but in the United States alone, offshore tax evasion cost our government about $166 billion in lost revenue each and every year. Now, that is money, it's a lot of money, that could be used to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our water systems. $1 trillion, it's 8 or 9 years of that $166 billion, could create up to 15 million good-paying jobs. That is money that could be used to provide universal pre-K for our children so that when kids get ready to go to school, they'll be prepared to do the work there. But instead of cracking down on offshore tax schemes, President Trump and my Republican colleagues in Congress are working overtime to pass legislation that would make this absurd situation even worse. At a time when corporations are making record-breaking profits, my Republican colleagues want to slash taxes for companies that are shifting American jobs to China and American profits to the Cayman Islands. At a time of massive wealth and income inequality, President Trump and the Republicans in Congress want to cut taxes for billionaires by repealing the estate tax on families who inherit over $5.5 million. Mr. President, I think the American people grasp the unfairness and the absurdity of the Republican tax proposal. Top 0.1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Very, very rich are getting richer while the middle class is shrinking. And the Republican response is to give massive tax breaks to the top 0.2%. 0.2%. These are families like the Walton family, the wealthiest family in America, that owns Walmart, who would get up to a $50 billion tax break. The Koch brothers, who have enough money to spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to elect right-wing candidates to Congress. Massive tax breaks for billionaires, and at the same time, an effort to throw up to 30 million people off of the health insurance they have. Massive cuts in education, in nutrition, and the programs that working families desperately need. Mr. President, instead of providing even more tax breaks to very profitable corporations and to billionaires in President Trump's cabinet, maybe, just maybe, it might be a good idea to go forward to close offshore tax loopholes and demand a fair, transparent, and progressive tax system. So I would hope that the American people are catching on, as I believe they are, to what a fraud the Republican tax proposal is. Today, 1 out of 5 major profitable corporations already pay zero in federal income tax. Now, you can't do much better than paying zero in federal income tax and be a profitable corporation. But that's what's going on. Republicans want to make that even worse, and then they want millions of middle-class people by the end of the decade to be paying more in taxes. That is absurd, and I hope the American people stand up and demand that we do not go forward with our proposal.